Cory, thank you for coming on the podcast today. I'm really excited because I was running late, and what's so funny is that you were in my ears as I was on a walk, because I'm listening to you, listening to different things you said, preparing for the interview. And then I was in the shower, and I said to myself, I'm running late. And I was like, why running late? Why not walking late? And as it's happened to turn out, I was on time. And I think part of the reason I was on time is because I was walking late. And I think that is a result, that reframe is a result of you. And so I wanted to share that with people listening, and I wanted to share that with you as well. So thank you.
Yeah, cool, man. I mean, any way that you can change the way that you're perceiving what you're experiencing in the moment to shake off the story of anxiety and the narrative that you've bought into, and kind of readdress and reconnect with actually what is happening in front of you, as opposed to what you're, shooting and placing upon it, then, hey, those things are invaluable, man. I'm glad whatever it was, I'm glad it helped. And also, when you were saying you were listening to something I said, I thought, God, I wonder what it could have been. There's no telling. Could have gone a lot of directions.
No, I mean, I like to listen to the voice of the guest to prepare myself for the person that you're about to speak to, and to research and to learn more about you. And, I got a real sense of calmness, and I'm just curious, have you always been this calm, this peaceful, this way about you? Have you always had this since you were a little child?
I'm just dead inside. It's no. Yeah, I mean, I've always been pretty calm, and whatever. I mean, some of that stuff, I think that any individual's personality traits are a mixture of nature and nurture, and in some cases, that nurture, of course, extends to one's own self-nurturing. Like, what do you do to yourself to change who you are and how you think? And then also some of it's environmental, some of it's just sort of the happenstance of genetics and whatever. But yeah, I've always been really calm, and whatever. Kind of like, I joke about how I look, whenever I'm moving, I look like I'm sort of underwater, like in half slow motion, and then as another joke, I think that my mom took prescription pain medicines while she was pregnant with me, so that probably has something to do with it too,
Wow.
But as a serious answer, yeah, I mean, I've always been externally calm, but whenever I was growing up, I had a lot of anxiety, like a ton. It was almost debilitating, just freaking out, all the time inside, because my brain was processing so much, and just getting real wound up, and then I had a lot of environmental factors that were very challenging and unconventional that I had to deal with. And it made it to where I was basically just like a strange mixture of intellectual arrogance and emotional fear. Like, so I was battling my emotional stunted growth and the anxiety that was coming from that, which of course that was, in relationships and communication, and even like reading social cues. I'm still not good at that, that stuff just manifested a lot of anxiety. And then, I tried to overcome it by feeling like I was smarter than anyone else. And of course, that's a very arrogant and narcissistic approach to life. But fortunately, I got those two things to sort of work together as opposed to against each other. And that's whenever I was, in my teens, I luckily, started meditation, reading philosophy, Eastern and Western philosophy and psychology. And I began to turn all of that force. Anxiety has a lot of energy. Like there's a lot coming through with it. There's a lot happening. And same thing with, your mind whenever it's fired up and happening as well. And then on top of that, a weird connection, sort of counterpoint to the calm thing that you mentioned is that I still do always have this thing. I don't really know what to call it. Like, I call it the intensity. Like it's just like a lot coming through. Like I feel like it's almost like there's a lot of like weight pressing down on me or something, and it's like a force. Like I got to get it out. It's like and I don't mean anything metaphysical, but it just feels like this a lot of like. I got to put it into something. That's why I work out every day, you know, because that's how I found. I used to put that into books and stuff, and now I'm like, all right, I did that for a long time, and I put that into, you know, because that working out really helps me stay grounded, you know, and embodied, as opposed to going off into which I've spent a lot of time there. But anyway, yeah, I mean, so figuring that out, I kind of figured out how to put all that stuff into. You know, actually working at being calm, you know, truly, not just sort of externally, and in a way against, you know, the environment does it.
So, I know you took Zoloft at 14 years old, and
how do you know that?
I try to do my research here, and you would spit it out.
Yeah.
And were you meditating at that point? What made you spit it out? And when did that stop? When were you like, I can't use this? Or take me through that process.
Yeah. So it's a real, this is a window into some of the environmental factors I was telling you about earlier. Again, I guess I must have mentioned that somewhere, but that's just sort of such a bizarre, intimate detail. So basically, I was already, you know, by the time I was like 12, I was really into like death metal and hip hop that was happening. This is 1994. So it was like the birth of like death metal and hip hop happening at once. I was 12 years old. It's perfect time to be alive. Right. And so I'm like super into all of that. I'm getting up to all sorts of other stuff. And I was, you know, definitely like, not Los Angeles, always like wearing all black, long hair, very like metal dude, anti-authoritarian, you know, and all that. And so, I was really into like weird shit as well. Like I liked trying to find as many, I don't know, just like bizarre pieces of art, or like, I just liked things that like blew my mind and were like freaked me out, you know? And so I would seek them all the time, and, like movies and, you know, just whatever it was I could find. It was crazy. And so, like, yeah, so at that time, lots of death metal and hip hop and whatever. And then so I was 12, 13, getting into that. I also was like, had started smoking weed around that time, where I was 12. And, so among a bunch of other horrible things, not horrible, but other things I was doing to my brain. And so what happened was that, you know, my mom used to go through my brother and I's rooms all the time, just as a general, I mean, that could be a podcast in and of itself, but, you know, I guess boredom and looking for some type of weird emotional and, you know, blackmail or whatever, you know, that was happening. So she would always just going through our shit, you know. And so anyway, she went through, you know, my brother and I used to just like joke about leaving notes in our dressers and under our beds about like, hey, what's going on? What, like, I don't know what you're trying to find, but, you know, anyway, so. Right. So when I was 14, then I basically came home one time, and she's like, hey, do you want to go to the mall and like buy some, you know, clothes or whatever? I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So I got in the car, we're driving, and we pull up to this like this giant like psych ward in Austin. And she was like, I'm taking you to see a psychiatrist. And I was like, what for? And we go in there, and then I go into this office. It's very disorienting, and I'm scared and like freaked out because I was like lied to, you know, to get there. I go in, and then there's a psychiatrist and my mom, and she produces this like manila envelope full of a bunch of stuff she'd collected from our room. Like I was trying to write like stories, draw things, and whatever. And it was all like crazy shit because I was trying to, my imagination was just like so, it was just like an ocean, right? So I'm writing these like, you know, Lord of the Rings, you know, like death metal Lord of the Rings type of stuff and like illustrating them. And like, it's just a, artistic practice. And, she's like, I found these they're pretty violent, she's like, found all this stuff, and whatever. And the psychiatrist was like, oh, well, you need to be an inpatient immediately. And I was like, what the fuck? So I go from there to like, he's like, okay, like take him away, boys. And I go like, they take all my stuff. They start drawing blood. I'm put in this inpatient program with a bunch of people who most of them truly were like meant to be there. I mean, they were like, had severe mental health issues that were like disruptive to their lives. Anyway, so I was in there and I was just sort of like, well, okay, so now what, right? Now what do I do? So I'm in there and I'm like, well, I mean, the only thing I can really do is show these people how well adjusted I am so that I can get out of here as quickly as possible, because like I may be like weird, but I'm not, I'm not like hallucinating and having some type of psychotic break like this guy. And, of course, I saw all sorts of beautiful stuff in there, like people getting, freaking out and losing their minds, like biting, people that work there and them ripping them down and jamming needles into them to make them pass out and like putting them in room. And they'd send you to a room every night, your room with no windows or clocks. So they're like, go into your room for 10 hours and you'd have no idea what time. I mean, you go crazy being in a mental institution, it'll drive you crazy. Like, it sounds bizarre, but anyway, so they started to just like with like zero in real investigation to the situation. They immediately are like Zoloft and a tranquilizer and something else, which you can't recall what it was. And so they're making like depression zombies, like they're like manufacturing them in this place. But even at that age, I already was aware, of like that was not good, and I knew that like my brain chemistry, it was changing rapidly because you're 14 years old and it's like you're growing like, exponentially at all times. And I thought, well, if this thing changes your brain chemistry to make you think a different way, I don't want to add something that alters my brain chemistry whenever it's like emerging and growing at this moment. And like, I'm not trying to take pills just because, and I was also pissed off because in there, all those things. So what would happen is, they would put those, you'd have to go to this window. They would make you, put the medication in your mouth, and they would look in your mouth to make sure you swallowed it. But yeah, I would always just stick it in between my teeth and my cheeks and go to the bathroom and spit it in the toilet and flush it. So there was nothing to be found. Like they couldn't find a stash of spit out. But anyway, that's one of many delightful things that happened to me when I was 14. And I got out of there in like a week, because I would be talking to the therapist in the group sessions and just sort of like, yeah, I mean, this is like, I don't know.
Crazy bunch.
Yeah, exactly, man. So that was my short-lived experience with it. And, the only area, I mean, it's pretty sharp for a 14-year-old. The only area where I messed up was that like after 5 days, I told one of the people, I was like, I do feel better after taking the medication. And they're like, yeah, that takes like 3 months to actually start working. I was like, oh, well, it must be the therapy then.
That's hilarious. So like, how does a situation like that, it sounds like a turbulent childhood, or at least a turbulent time. How does that impact you today, if at all?
Yeah, man. I mean, experience like that and a whole, I mean, there's countless others that are similar to that. They really helped me. They forced me to realize what I think is really one of the, if not the most important thing that a person can realize whenever they're trying to just be a better human or a more self-aware human. And that was that our perception is subjective. And I realized that because of the emotional, where I was, and I realized that I didn't have the language for it, but I, knew the concept. I could tell what I was experiencing. And then later when I went on to, that's part of the reason that drew me to Western philosophy anyway, is because people like, Husserl and so forth, these phenomenologists, that's like their whole thing, to a degree. And of course, Nietzsche was like, he was speaking my death metal language. So I love that. But yeah, man, like, so basically having people telling you certain things about what was happening and what was, happening in reality, what was happening around you, what you were and weren't allowed to feel, and then also sort of like love bombing and gaslighting and all that stuff, I just started slowly realizing like, oh, and then, with my brother and I, like, there was always multiple stories going on, but not like we would communicate what we were being told, from our parents to each other. But hey, yeah, it's interesting how these stories of what's happened and what is happening aren't aligning with each other. And we would always stay in close communication about that. And we actually had like this deal of like, no matter how mad we got at each other whenever we were younger and, kids, we were like, okay, we gotta like, no matter where it is, we gotta still stay, 100 on this communication thing because it's keeping us safe, and so that made me realize that, that I started realizing, oh, hold on a second, like what the story in your mind and like your impression of what reality isn't necessarily the truth. It's just this reading of the world outside of your skin, and your mind is filling in these gaps, and like the information that you're told and the things that, are manufactured to make you feel a certain way influence the projection of, what you project in your mind onto reality and the way that you feel. And I began to understand that intuitively. Whenever I was in my middle teen years. And so as I went on to, begin, studying those things personally, like just autodidactically, I began understanding the actual systems behind those things. But that is the most important, the reason I say that's such an important thing to learn is because once you learn that your reality is subjective, then like, first off, just arguments and things like that, judgments, like all that stuff just falls away, because you just realize like, oh, right, we have two different points of view and both of them are right to us and both of them are wrong, to the world outside of either of us. And so you can work with that or you can work against that,
It seems like even with the pact with the brother, it was like your brother was a very much seeking truth is what you were after in that moment. And from my perspective as a meditator looking at you, you're also trying to seek truth. And that's a line that runs throughout the course of your life. Do you think that do you believe that by meditating, by getting to know yourself, you are in fact seeking truth?
Oh, yeah. Internal and external. I think that, for me, and remember again, this is like in the mid 90s. So there was no, like meditation was a different thing, then it wasn't as like, it's so omnipresent now, it's just everywhere. But then, first off, there was no Google, and there was no YouTube.
That's a big one.
Yeah. There were no smartphones, and it was like, I basically learned stuff the old fashioned way of like, finding a book, and then they would talk about other books, and I'd go find those books, and then it was just, that was my search engine was, it's a little, processing time was a little slower than Google, but yeah, I initially started it because I was so just like, so much suffering to where I was so unhappy and so like tense and like, and just, all the time. And so I was trying to just calm down. I knew I needed to calm down, and so I started doing that with meditation just very simply. But the more I did it, the more I realized that like, oh, hold on a second. This is like actually affecting other parts of my life. And then over time it became to where I was like, oh, now I'm like, like the times where I would have reacted in life to certain things, there's like a space between that and the experience,
yes.
and stuff like that. But so as I, probably 4 or 5 years in really of like meditating, just sort of my own DIY way, that's whenever I really started like, over that time, it became clearer and clearer that the point of meditation, I guess, is like I was recognizing the meditator. And again, like I had no language for any of that. I was just trying to like read all these different mixture of like, the dentist, like I got a really, I was reading, I don't know how I even found these things. It was just the chance and the luck of what was around where I'd go to like a random bookstore. Like I was reading D.T. Suzuki and all these things, even back then. And, then, like then the hippie philosophers like Alan Watts and even like Robert Anton Wilson or someone like that, or Ram Dass, finding things like that and then mixing that with Western philosophy and trying to just figure out. And I started realizing, like, hold on a second, there's like this agent in my mind. There's this observer that's observing my thoughts. And I would just lay in my bed. And like, actually, this is kind of a funny story, is that whenever I was a teenager and I was trying to meditate, I would like lay on my bed and close my eyes, and I would just breathe in and then breathe out and try and relax all of the muscles of my body as much as I can. And every exhale, I would relax like more and more and more and more. I'd try and see how like relaxed I could get until I felt like I was like floating. And I actually put this little exercise in my book because I just thought it was like a cool, like grab, like a deep pull from my very first meditation. And what happened was, like, I would be meditating like that, just trying to see how relaxed I could get. And then I started, like, there came a point where I would open my eyes and I would look down at the wall and I would feel like the wall was the floor and I was stuck. The wall I was looking at while laying down was the floor and I was stuck to the wall. And I'd be like, whoa, I'm like, and I feel like I'm like defying physics or something, but it was really just my brain like reorienting its self-understanding, and that's whenever I started observing, like, oh, there's someone like watching the facsimile of what's happening in reality, and that's when I started recognizing the meditator. And I know it's a super long, I'm Mr. Long answer, so I apologize, but your question was like, was it a goal to find truth? And that was the beginning of it. The beginning of truth is realizing that you're the observer of your reality. And the second part of that is realizing the true nature of reality, which is objective reality unfettered by your own projections and your own, the delusion of your own perception. And wherever you find that, a real connection with the observer awareness of just that you are this awareness that's experiencing information going in through your sense doors, through your ears, your nose, your mouth, your eyes, and so forth. And plus one, another sense door is your mind, so the thoughts moving across the stage of your mind, that's another form of sense consciousness. And you're behind all of that, observing all of that. Then you also begin to see, the same, have the same type of clarity with objective reality, where it's like, oh, right, everything I'm seeing is really kind of this story, this impression, and whatever I'm putting onto it is really just my delusion. Then you mix those two things together, and that's ultimately enlightenment. And whenever, for example, Shoghi Trungpa has a great quote where he says, enlightenment is the ego's biggest disappointment, because there's all this stuff where people, they seek enlightenment, the idea of enlightenment. Often they don't even know what it is. They've read, a meme or something, and they think that they have the sense of it. And that adds a lot of confusion and extra suffering and extra delusion. But the enthusiasm, the spiritual enthusiasm that people have to seek that type of thing is genuinely a great and wholesome type of pursuit. But of course, what happens, particularly in westernized culture where individualism and, comparison and those things are so highlighted, where it's like, you must be better than the next person and you must, compare and whatever, like that can turn into this thing of like, I'm going to get, really far on the spiritual path so that I can feel better than all of everyone around me, and that's just the pitfall that everyone goes through. I've certainly went through it. But whenever you break through that, hopefully, if you do keep going, then that experience I mentioned of the inner awareness and the outer awareness, connecting, it's very, very dry in a beautiful way, and people expect it to be something magical. It's like, well, it is magical. It's just not the type of magic you were looking for.
Interesting. That's fascinating. There's so much I want to break down and go into.
Yeah.
It's one thing you mentioned was about you set up this exercise when you're laying in bed and floating, and it felt like you were floating. And it's fascinating because I don't remember where I read it, but I read that in order to help people who had PTSD go to sleep, one exercise they created was to lay on your back in your bed with your feet dangling off your bed and laying down and imagine you were floating in a river.
Yeah.
And it just struck me. I don't know where I came across that, but I tried it a few times and it definitely worked. And this has inspired me to do it again.
Nice.
Why do you think something like that works to help people go to sleep?
Yeah, well, the foot on the ground thing, my understanding is that is because it a lot of people, particularly who have PTSD, if they lay down, they'll start to feel disoriented because of their laying down. And so the equilibrium of laying down and feeling like kind of ungrounded becomes very scary because you're like in oblivion. And when you're in like this sort of vacuum, then all the, you're susceptible to all of the thoughts coming through. But having feet on the ground centers the sort of gyroscope of your body, so you feel your equilibrium is like soothed by knowing where the floor is, but then you're able to relax as well by laying down on the bed, which I think that's, if I recall correctly, that's why that works. But yeah, I mean, it helps people sleep because, I mean, people are so uptight, everyone is so wound up, and it's really spooky, like, I mean, practically everyone I know is like just this. You look at anybody, like just take a good look at someone when you're just, in the store next time or whatever. Just look at someone, even or a friend, like they're so, there's the level of like tension and mind racing and like darting focus that they have, like people's, the pinhole of their awareness is so fractured and scattered because of just the repetition of their daily, lives and whatever. But man, yeah, most people are just so like tweaked and, doing some type of breathing practice, even the most like basic possible, which is nothing wrong with basic. I mean, basic is great because it works, and it's foolproof. That helps people begin to just offload some of that stuff, because if you think about like if you hold like a weight in your hand or something, and you hold like a 50-pound weight or dumbbell, and you hold it for like as long as you can, and then keep going, and then go into God of War mode, and then keep holding it, and like you think about how your forearm is like screaming and burning and burning and burning until you can't take it up anymore, and then it just like your hand cramps and you drop it, and your arm is like tweaked out, and that's basically like people are just, their whole bodies are that forearm. They're just tense with the anxiety of the day and their minds, and like everything, something that happened to them 20 years ago, they're still like, bound up from that. They haven't shaken that off yet. And so if you can get them to relax, then hell yeah, they go to sleep because they're like, oh my God, I'm actually like, letting go for the one time, the first time in a lot of cases.
Yeah. What you're describing sounds like suffering, and it seems like how a lot of people are operating in the day to day. And you yourself, you described your own experience as suffering when you were in your teens, maybe, or around then. And I was listening to Ram Dass last night speak about how the point of suffering is closest to the point of awakening. And I just found that fascinating. I never really stopped to consider it and why that might be. Because if you're suffering, you really have no other option but to let go and be. So, right. Yeah, take me through your experience of how suffering led to greater awareness.
Yeah, and that's a great quote, and I think that's comes from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I could be wrong, but where he says that I'm never closer to God than whenever I'm basically in immense pain.
Yeah.
And that's emotional pain or physical pain, whatever. Yeah, I mean, I think that little mechanism, that quote, is speaking to the fact that like life is challenging, and it's always going to be full of tension and anxiety and problems and whatever. And people naturally take the path of least resistance because they're trying to conserve energy, because we're animals, and we're wired to conserve as much energy as possible. That's why like a lion lays around for 3 days before it goes and kills something. It's because it's trying to like rest so that it can go kill something, And so we're always trying to conserve energy. And even just like sitting on the couch, your brain functioning burns. It's like, it's like a light bulb up there. It burns intellectual, power and energy. And so we try and not think, try and not think about things and just like kind of zone out. And so, what typically happens is that whenever an external intervention, something outside of our choosing, something in life happens to us, not that because we're being passive, we don't choose to go, get into a situation, but something traumatic or just something, that really sucks, it doesn't have to be traumatic, happens. That's whenever you're thrown off balance and you're like, oh man, now I have to focus on this and I have to deal with this and and that's what that quote is about. And so if you're in basically a hell state, you're going to be doing a lot of work to get out of that hell state. But if you're not in a hell state, you're not going to be having the same fury and the same, energy and drive to get out of that, And you asked how it worked for me. I mean, I guess I was quote unquote lucky, but is that I just was, like in a perpetual hell state, And so I had that fire to get out of there, from a very young age. And also, at the same time, and, another part of it is like, my parents separated when I was very young, when I was a little kid. And I remember thinking like I don't have anyone to show me the world. Mm-hmm. And so if I need to like understand how the world works, I have to figure it out. And I'm kind of like gonna, be damned to just like sit around and just let life happen to me. I'm going to take control of this and like, make it happen on my own. And I think that that's where the combination of like the kind of the suffering, the frustration with it, my like natural anti-authoritarianism against the bullshit, that's happening. Because also I could see other ways of life. I mean, that was the big thing is it's like, no, I know this isn't what life is. And like nothing is what life is other than what you make it to be, And so that mixed with this notion of like, well, I'm going to have to be the one to hack through the jungle. So let's get to it, and all that stuff. It's kind of, how that path began being traversed.
What's been your relationship with mentors? Because I could see if you were young and had no one to guide you, you could be looking for one or you could be pushing away. The idea of mentorship, what role have mentors played in your life?
Yeah, I was always very against mentors that were tangible because of like, I looked at like quote unquote God figures, your parents when you're a kid are like the God figures. I looked at those as false prophets, and so I was like, well, a mentor is going to be another person that's just full of shit, and it's going to be, and I can figure this out myself. Like I don't need them. And so I would make my mentors intangibles. I would make them musicians, authors, philosophers. So I worshipped like Nietzsche and Miles Davis and, people like that whenever I was younger. Like literally I had like, posters of them, and like I would just, they were kind of like my weird, like the weird parental mentor gods that I created in my mind. And I realized that at a certain point, I realized that was a type of idolatration where I was like making them these things that they weren't, as kind of this like, if only I could be that great of a musician or that great of a philosopher or whatever. But so I've never had a proper mentor, but I have had a really small handful of people in my life that have been important and, really more than anything, like just getting me to like cut the shit as like a young person, and like introducing me into some other things I couldn't have really got to. One friend, when I was 18, I met a friend. I was working at a bookstore and he was, 30 years older than me at that time, but a real cool guy, like a savant with literature and stuff like that. And just also he was like an ex-hippie. So he turned me on to all sorts of, like William Burroughs and all this stuff like that, and then all this literature stuff and different ways of thinking. And he was very into Zen, and so he helped open a lot of doors to different things. And then I had, whenever I was 24 or 5 or something, I was, already composing music then. And I was selected for a month-long residency at this place. They would have like master artists that you could apply to study under, and you would stay there for like 1 month at this place and study every day with this master artist. And so it was like a worldwide, call for works or whatever. So I submitted this proposal that was just probably stupid and insane. And I got picked by another artist, a German artist named Carsten Nicolai, who's incredible. He actually, if you're familiar with that movie, The Revenant, he composed the soundtrack to The Revenant. But anyway, like his work is amazing. So I applied to him. I went there, and then there was one of the other master artists was a guy named John F. Simon Jr., who's been on my podcast a bunch of times. And we just we just hit it off in this weird way. I mean, he's like 20 years older than I am or something. But I really knew he was going to be a good kind of like teacher for me whenever at the beginning of the first year at this residency, there's all these artists from all around the world, and we all have to like show whatever our piece was that we submitted. So like I had made this crazy piece of music that was like noisy, static, and like super intellectual, and whatever. And so I played that, and then he came up afterwards. And he's like, I hear a lot of Miles Davis in that. And I was like, dude, what in the world? How? And he's like, yes, it's a negative space. And I was like, all right, we're gonna be friends, And if you can hear it in that, then. But yeah, he just was cool, and like we're still in touch. I've seen him here and there, and he's an incredible human. And at that time, he really helped me like just focus, because I had all that energy that I said that was coming through, where I was like, blah. I have like I used to say that like my the meat on my body was mine, but my skeleton was possessed. Like I just felt like I was just so insanely driven to like do what I was trying to do. It was unhealthy, honestly, but the level where I was at with it. But he really helped me like focus that and, kind of grow up a little bit and see the game a bit more clearly, because even at that time, like I had a successful creative person takes an artistic mind and also a business mind, and then a social mind to understand how the relationships and the timing of those type of things work, and all three of those things have to be working together. If you want to be successful, relatively in your lifetime or have any type of profession at it. And I was just purely in the creative space, like just going like in the black hole, like with it. And he was like, okay, you have to learn how to like talk to people and like, focus and like have a plan and all this stuff. So anyway, he was a very helpful mentor and continues to be. I still talk to him, and he's one of the few people I could think of in the entire world that like, I think it's because of a lot of what we've discussed, but like whenever people compliment me, I appreciate it, but I don't feel anything, because it's a combination of like, well, I know that, who I really am, which, I mean, I am who I really am, but like I'm just an idiot like everyone else. And I appreciate that whatever it is that I've done has been useful to you, but it's not me. Like I just did a thing, and the user of the thing is the one that should be getting complimented, in my opinion. It's like, you're the one that read the thing that I wrote and were able to like abstract something from it meaningful to you, and then to like apply it to your life. Like I'm impressed by you that you did it, so that was sort of like a disarming mechanism at first, because when I first started like doing stuff publicly, I really was trying to make sure that like my ego wasn't swayed by any of the stuff. So anyway, but he is one of the few people, all that to say, he's one of the few people, whenever he still tells me that he's proud of me. And it is touching to me. It means something, because he's known me for almost 20 years at this point, and like seen me through, Yeah,
it's a fascinating thing. Are you familiar with Derek Sivers, being in the music world?
Yeah,
and also meditation world, or mindfulness kind of. Derek Sivers has this great thing where it's like, if somebody compliments you, just say thank you.
Yeah,
and
totally.
That struck me when I was like, I don't know, I read that maybe 10 years ago or a long time ago, and I always kept it in mind because it's so simple. And I think he got that because he went on tours with a bunch of bands, and the bands didn't know what to say when somebody came up to them and was like, oh, amazing music. And you realize that the best thing is just to say thank you. And
absolutely.
It's powerful, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It took me forever to learn that, because I used to try and wiggle out of it, whenever someone's complimenting me, I'd say something like, weird to like, I'd say something abstract to like make the situation confusing, and then I'd make a joke about it, and then we could like move on away from the compliment, little smoke and mirrors. But yeah, it finally realized, just say thanks, and then then it's all good. But that thing is weird. Like, it is still, it is weird to like have people telling you, a stranger giving you a compliment. It's
Why?
a strange thing. Well, I mean, yeah, it's a good question. I think because I still don't feel like I've done anything that's like worth complimenting, and like what I've done, I don't like value. I don't know. I don't ever go around thinking about myself as someone who's accomplished anything. I don't go around thinking about myself as someone who knows anything. I just am a mind, an observer that's moving through a set of experiences, in the moment that I'm experiencing them, with great appreciation and depth to what I experience. And whenever someone is coming with a compliment or something, it really doesn't fit into the world in which I see myself. They see me as someone who is, has shared an insight with them or something that has changed the way that they think about, their experience. And that is my goal, but it's not what I think about. I don't go around thinking about myself as that, right? I think about like all this shit I think about, it's because it's stuff I've experienced and thoughts I've come up with that have helped me over the years. And I think that if I could share those, it's like map sharing, where they'll get through the train a little faster. But I don't ever think like, and now I'm owed because of that. It's like, I just do it because it's just what I do. It's like, I don't know. Why do you do anything? I don't know how I do it. I don't know why I do it. I just do it because it feels right,
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to put it in an analogy that might make sense, is like, imagine you start lifting weights, and you start lifting weights because you need to, or you want to, and you enjoy doing it, and you become really proficient at it, and you become jacked, and everyone can see you're jacked. And then all of a sudden somebody comes along and takes that inspiration from your body and is like, I want to look like that too. And then they start going on their own journey, and that helps them because you taught them a movement. Your intention was never to impact them in their experience in that way. However, as a result of what you naturally did, it did impact them, and it did make a difference. And I think that, your presence in terms of how you operate and the work you've done on yourself comes through. And even though it's not your intention, it made me look at the world slightly different. And I'm sure if people are listening and really paying attention, they might say, that's interesting. What's going on there? And that might lead to changes in their own life as well.
Yeah, I hope so. Because I mean, that's I was trying to whittle down my goals for my work, like to as few words as possible. And I won't be able to calm down and wake up. That's the whole thing. Everyone calm down and pay attention. Like that's it. So if that happens, then good. But,
well, you have a great quote on that topic. Calm people, calm people.
Mm-hmm.
What's that
That's
about?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's like, you think about, most people have a general, and this is part kind of evolutionary, psychology and learned behavior, but people change how they're feeling and how they're acting based on who they're around. Like, you think if you go to a party and everyone's, super lit, and people are going to be like, yeah, and they're going to, change their vibe. They wouldn't be acting like that if they were home alone, like making dinner or whatever. It's like a different energy,
Yep.
And if you're on the subway and there's someone who is, really tweaked out and has like a violent, aggressive, like chaotic energy, you're going to get tense. You're going to get freaked out. You're going to feel chaotic, whatever. And then if you're around someone that's really chill, then you're going to feel that way too. And, if if you are a calm person, if you do things to just, blow off some of that steam and get comfortable into yourself and get present and, get some clarity, then people will feel that. And, that's the whole, again, that's like, like with Gandhi's thing of like, you want to be the change you want to see in the world. My life is my teaching. Any of his quotes about that, that's what he's talking about. Is like, it's obviously wise. Did you know that Gandhi was wise? No, it's obviously wise because like, that, like, man, that people, I've learned this from like just teaching a lot of, in-person classes, of course, doing a podcast for 6 or 7 years and reaching millions of people and then hearing from them all, is that like, which I appreciate, is that people don't really, you can't teach anybody anything. You can set up a situation in which they can discover something for themselves, right? And because a person has to, again, back to that sort of that passivity thing, for a real insight to integrate into someone's mind to a degree to where it is a key that opens one of those locks. It has to be their hand that turns that key. So I could, tell somebody all day about, the Satipatthana Sutra or something like that from the Pali Canon, and it would just sound like, they might sound cool. Like, that's beautiful noise, Cory. Thank you. And my pleasure. I'm happy to share it, But it's not going to mean anything to them unless they go look at it themselves, or maybe something I told them about it makes them think, oh, that's interesting. I'm going to go read about it. And then they read about it and they put two and two together. That's how insights happen. That's why Zen poems are so cool. That's like whenever, Zen koans, for anyone that's not familiar, it's basically a small Zen poem that is meant to cause an insight or cause kind of a form of enlightenment in someone. And the reason why those work, the reason why I like them too, is because they're set up like that. They're designed like that. They're often contradictory. They often intentionally don't make sense. Like, you can't square the logic in them. But they're designed like that because one piece fits in one way, one piece of the logic or whatever fits in a different way. And by reconciling the two, that the act of reconciling forces you to have to be the one that creates the connection. Therefore, you have created the insight for yourself, and it becomes a self-teaching tool.
Like, I don't remember who did the quote, but the ability to hold two things in your mind at the same time and have it make sense is a sign of intelligence. I don't, who is
sure.
that?
Yeah. It sounds familiar.
That's what a Zen
checks
poem
out.
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm asking that as a question because I'm like, what is the exact quote? But about the Zen poems, would the Tao Te Ching be an example of that?
Yeah, sure. It's not like a straight up one, but yeah, it's in the neighborhood of that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you look at like the gateless gate, that's like a name of one, that is really, really nice. But the Tao Te Ching definitely has got some of the action going in there. That was really the first, like the first text that really started it all, pretty much, the Tao Te Ching, which is why it's so awesome.
Well, you mentioned before about how when you were young, you would go and you didn't have Google, so you went from one resource to the next. What are some resources for somebody who's just on this wavelength, or just hears you and wants to explore more? Like, where would you recommend somebody start, or like what resources other than your podcast or like external resources?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the podcast is good, but I mainly talk about, like, the podcast is more rooted in kind of consciousness and punching, like, in a nuanced way, punching a lot of the buttons, the meta programming buttons in someone's minds to get them to sort of realize things about themselves. It's like a backdoor teaching tool is the way I look at the podcast. Like, we're talking about stuff, but I'm assuming, and I want the listener to be like hearing it and then to have something sort of click and for them to think about it themselves and then have, to create some change or something. But I mean, my book is a good resource because I really tried to lay it out for anyone of any level. So like a beginner or someone, because it's everything, every sentence pretty much is written in a layered way to where if you're a beginner, it's going to mean one thing to you. And if you're very advanced, it's going to mean something else to you. And so I kind of wrote it like that to where, that way anyone could use it. So that's a really good source. Outside of that, yeah, I mean, I guess like it's not really like there's a lot of different options of how, if you want to get into meditation or mindfulness. Obviously, there's tons of classic books out there. You can, Google meditation and find tons of guided meditations or whatever it is. And that stuff's all cool. It's all sort of like language to help one carve out an understanding of what it is more. But my my suggestion for the best teacher that you could find is just your own mind.
Yeah.
So if you start watching your own mind, that's really going to be your best teacher. And what's cool is you'll never outshine it. You'll never, graduate. I would say that someone wants to get interested in this and start looking for a resource. Well, look for the resource within, and just consistently for 5 to 10 minutes a day, start your day or end your day, whatever, by doing lower the stakes, forget everything you've been told or you think is supposed to be meditation or whatever, any of what we're talking about, forget all that, and just close your eyes and just count, observe your breath going in and going out. And if you get too tweaked out, then even add sitting in there as a variable so that even the silence isn't scary. So you can breathing in, now I'm breathing out, and I'm sitting. I'm breathing in, I'm breathing out, I'm sitting. And just trying to kind of relax your face and your shoulders as you're doing that. And just do that for 5 to 10 minutes a day with no goal in mind, no stakes, no expectations, no nothing. Just try that and just start noticing what happens. Start noticing that after a week, 2 weeks, you're like, I normally would be a little bit more tense in this situation, but I feel a little bit calmer. Or you're talking to someone and you're about to make some, comment that's negative or whatever, and you just notice that you're about to make it before you make it, instead of making it and then being like, ooh, I kind of feel like an asshole. You notice it's coming and you're like, I actually don't have to say that if I don't want, all right, well, I'll just put that back into the void from which it came, And you just slowly continue progressing that, continue kind of following your instincts, and you can just do that essentially for a lifetime.
Why do you think people who meditate become kinder?
Oh, I think just it's a raise of self-awareness, and it's not always the case, but generally.
Do you know of any of examples when that's not true?
Yeah, there's a lot of, have you ever seen the show Billions before? The main guy is this sociopathic hedge fund owner that he meditates for 15 minutes a day so that he can have a clearer mind to game, to use game theory to ruin everyone, So there's certainly everything's possible.
Yeah.
But generally, whenever one becomes more self-aware, they're more aware of, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. They become more aware of the world outside of themselves, and they realize that, oh, hold on a second, everyone else has the same complicated, human thing happening inside of them that I do inside of me. And it just gives you a bit more space, a bit more awareness of that another human being is going through human experience alongside with you. And it makes you realize that, hey, we should probably just all try and be cool and be kinder to each other, because, we're all experiencing the same thing. It's tough being a human, and I think that just having more awareness of that just makes people honor it more.
What a beautiful conversation. What a beautiful place to come to a close. I'm so grateful. There's so much stuff I want to talk to you about, but we'll have to do a part 2 sometime, because this was a tremendous experience, and I'm grateful for you and you taking the time. So thank you, Cory.
No problem, man. Thank you. It was a good time. I'm happy to come back. And maybe next time I'll try not to give such long answers and be able to get through more stuff.
No, it was great. Keep being you.
Thanks.